Hello and welcome to my session for Understanding for a Complex World. I decided to record this for those that couldn't make my workshop and also for any attendees who want to be reminded of certain parts. So my session was called Using the Understanding Map to Uncover Hidden Stories in Photographs. A brief introduction, I'm Lenny Dutton. This is a very flattering photograph of me. I currently teach NYP design at the International School of Stuttgart. I just moved here in August from the Atlanta International School. I'm also the personal project coordinator. I've been a librarian and a digital coach. I always say to my students the main things that I value in my class are effort, kindness, and play. You can find me on Twitter at Lenny Dutton, and I have a blog, Excited Educator, though if you're watching this video, you probably already know that. So, I also like greyhounds, Korean food, Japanese toys, illustration museums, and a lot more nerdy stuff. So, I come from a news family. These are two photographs of my dad when he was much younger. He recently retired. He was a news cameraman for 40 years. So, he filmed in various war zones. He was off when I was 3 weeks old filming in the Gulf War. He actually had some of his fingers blown off by some shrapnel from a mortar bomb in Sarajevo. So when I was much younger, because he was in war zones, the news was on the TV 24 hours a day. As I got older, he started filming national news just in London, but still the news, we would watch it every night to see what he recorded. So it's always been a big part of my life. So I'm going to wear my design hat just for the first part. The first part of the workshop was a lot of me kind of talking at the participants, and then the rest of it was activities. The activities are coming later. So I'm wearing my design hat, but as you know, design is a magic word. It's a noun, it's an adjective, and it's also a verb. So even though I'm teaching a subject called design, I'm sure students in every subject class are acting as designers, as are teachers. So I thought about the session yesterday and about taking the tame to the wild and finding that halfway point. So for me, I kind of thought about two things. Firstly, that maybe the tame can often be just the products. So if we just focus on just making a product, it can be kind of boring. And maybe the wild is those complex issues. So often when I say I'm a design teacher, people kind of glaze over, their eyes glaze over, and they kind of envision that I just make things that hold mobile phones and learning clocks and wooden signs and kind of that very formulaic thing where every kid in the classroom is designing the exact same thing and customizing it slightly. Really, design in the NYP and in my school is not like that at all. So we're doing things like looking at these sorts of questions. So how might design improve the experience of the long-term sick? How might we design a toy to engage children in complex issues? How might we redesign our spaces to change the way we learn? And with these questions, they automatically get kids to discuss complex issues, but also students will all produce wildly different products. So we do some small skill-based things where they learn the different skills they need, but often a student will come to me and say they want to design something that they have never tried before, using skills they haven't used before, and that's fine. We learn to meet the needs of their product. So I kind of thought about complex problems and cool products. When they meet in the middle, that's when students are using the knowledge of complex problems, the key, in the locks. That's when they're actually making good design. And by good design, I also mean kind design. So designers at the heart of it are problem solvers. So I know yesterday we also spoke about, if you look around the room, everything that's there is the product of the Industrial Revolution. All the good things we have in the world that have come out of that, but also negative things. Same with design. If you look around your room, if you think about your hobbies, your interests, the things you interact with daily, there's a designer involved in some part of that. So when I was thinking about complex problems, I just put some of them here. Zero hunger, life below water, clean water, etc. And I thought about some of the cool products. Even though I teach NYP, so we kind of grade and look at the design cycle as a whole, the students spend just as much time investigating and reflecting as they do building. Often the kind of takeaway, the thing they remember, the thing that people see when they come into the design studio is often these cool products. So this is quite a messy screen that has lots of words in my Venn diagram. hopefully on the left you notice that the words that I had there are the UN Global Goals. So I had these laminated individually large above my whiteboard. Often we'll do a unit or lesson based on these goals, but throughout the year, for whatever unit they're doing, I'll say, oh, that's a really great idea. Does that link to any UN global goal? And it's really a thread that runs through our class. So we had this messy board here. It's going to get worse. So this is my messiest slide, but I wanted to talk about some of the products my students have made. So as I think about Zero Hunger and apps, one of my students actually for his personal project, he made an app which was almost like an Uber for food donation. So companies at the end of the day could say if they had food left over and the local food bank would pick up the food. So this was an app called Food Flip, and it was he worked with companies like Whole Foods and he donated all the food to Atlanta Food Bank. I recently did the UN Goals Global Challenge, which is something else you can find on my blog. And one of the students, they're all doing prototypes. One of the students designed a buy one, get one free food subscription package. So it would either be that you would get just a normal food subscription package, and then also when you buy that, a high calorie one would go off to someone who's malnourished, or it would be the same food. She wasn't 100% sure, but I thought that was a really nice idea. The next one was looking at clean water and maybe dinnerware. So these are some objects I have in my room. The orange cup here is called the Right Cup. It's a cup that's plastic but smells of fruit, or you can even get a cola one. So when you drink just normal water, the sensation, the smell makes you think you're drinking fruit juice. So it's a way to encourage people to drink water. And then I also have a picture of the life straw. So my students, we have a life straw in class. We talk about it quite a lot, about all the things it can prevent, from river blindness through to guinea worm. They're also delighted about the life straw because you can go on YouTube and watch videos of people testing it in puddles or out of their toilets. So they really like that. But then we talked about the kind of human problem. A lot of people who are given these life straws, they don't really see the purpose. They don't drink from them. They just use them occasionally. There was a company that went abroad to, I want to say, Cambodia. I'm not 100% sure. I think it's Cambodia or Thailand. And they basically took this virtual reality game. So the students would, well, the young people would put on the virtual reality and they would fight river monsters, big animated monsters. Then at the end of the session, he would give the life straw and say, this is how you actually fight the real river monsters. So my students were quite enamored with that. And so one of my students, for a prototype, she decided to make life straws that were also fruit flavored, so it would have that kind of way to encourage people to use them. And so the prototype had like little scratch and sniff stickers. The next one at the top is the plastic fishing toy. So in my very first class, I took this plushy whale into class, and without the stuff coming out, and they had to work out what it was. And it's just a big cuddly toy whale. And they had a few guesses, and then I undid the zip and pulled out all this plushy litter. So this is a toy that's done to encourage students to talk about ocean waste, little children. And on the right, I just put a picture of a hooker duck. So at the moment, my grade 8s are designing educational games. They can be educating about anything that they want. So people are choosing endangered animals, life below water, gender equality. Someone's doing one about LGBT issues. This one, a student wants to make one about plastic in our oceans. So she's going to have like a wooden fishing toy, but you can't tell if it's really a plastic bag or a jellyfish. When you pick it up, underneath will either have minus points if it's a plastic bag or plus points if it's a jellyfish, and it will have facts about plastic in the oceans. The next one is robots. You can see I've color coordinated robots and climate change. This is because we do first LEGO League Robotics. Every single year LEGO produce this, and it's linked to a different issue or problem or a way that we can use technology to benefit the world. So it's been linked to trash before, it's been linked to animal allies and hydrodynamics. This year is really linked to space exploration. In NYP Design, we start off a unit by getting students to discuss what is the big problem they're trying to solve. So we started off this by saying, okay, well, why do LEGO want us to learn about space? Why might we want to explore space? Why do we want to learn about space? And one of the, they have loads of different ideas. One of them wants to really explore space because he thinks that our films that are filmed in space, like Star Wars, will look better if they're actually recorded in space. So kind of creative and wonderful ideas. But the big picture is thread going through it is most kids are talking about the potential to live on a different planet one day, because of the way that we're damaging our current environment. So a lot of them were talking about climate change. So that's kind of the thread that runs through that one. City of the Future. This is a unit I did a few years ago where we looked at kind of planned cities from Celebration, which is made by Disney, through to Serenbe, which is kind of utopian town, through to all these kind of ideas for sustainable cities of tomorrow, so big skyscrapers with vertical gardens and all sorts. Students in that unit design 3D models. The first time I did it was a digital 3D model. This time when they do it, they're going to do it digital, or they can do like an architectural model, or they can do a 3D printed model. They can do it however they want. And then lastly, my current grade 6 unit, we have moved away from using Scratch or any block coding. They're actually going to be writing a choose your own adventure style game using HTML in a program called Twine. They have been testing various educational games. So there's one called Bad News Game, which is one of the Beasley Design Award shortlist nominees, which is a game where you are someone who spreads fake news and disinformation. We looked at some math games, like a game called Prodigy. We looked at some of the games on Change Gamer, which include games about climate change, games about poverty, all different kind of complex issues, but learned through kind of the softer approach of gaming. So they have been doing this. And then they get to decide what they make the game on. So some of them have done it about topics they've covered in school or primary school, so things like ancient Egypt or basic math. They've done all different stuff. And then this is what one kid wrote. And this is a grade 6, so someone who just turned 11. So her thing was overfishing, or maybe a survival game, but the overfishing game. I want to make a game about overfishing where you're a fisherman trying to support your family while facing the challenge of other commercial ships destroying the native population of fish. So I thought I was kind of blown away by this student's response. You know, it was really kind of a complex and serious issue which she wants to explore through the game. So I thought that was pretty cool. So moving on, today's session is really going to be focused on how we can use a single issue to explore complex issues. So I always have to start off by showing them some sort of stimuli to understand or discuss these complex issues before we launch into, you're going to be making an educational toy, you're going to be making a game, or even you're going to be making a textile product. Because if I just said, we're going to learn HTML, you're going to make a choose your own adventure game, I don't think we would have had such kind of deep ideas that they want to discuss. So the activity I'm going to show everyone, or I did show everyone in my workshop today, is really one that you can do. You can plug in any photograph you want that you think would be suitable, and you can go through all these different activities to really explore the one photograph in depth. And I have done this with ESOL, and I've done it with science class and more. The particular photograph I've done, I'm going to show everyone, is one that I've done with ESOL and science and my advisory. But before that, the icebreaker I had was, what is the earliest news story you remember? And people said the day that Elvis died, the rapeseed oil scandal, different protests, when John Lennon died, and a few more. My first news story that I remember was really either my dad getting injured in Sarajevo, or when myself and a few other select students in my primary school were featured in the local newspaper because of our success with reading. So I don't know which one I remembered more, or which this says about me. And the reason I said this was when I went to Sixth Form College, age 16, this was the only icebreaker we did in my advisory, and it really had an impact on me, because I remember sharing kind of my experience. Someone else there, I think her father, maybe her uncle, had been murdered, so spoke about that, and a few people spoke about different news stories that had interested them. We were a classroom pretty much of just English kids who grew up in London their whole lives, maybe not such a diverse answers you might have if you are asking adults from around the world. But what really surprised me was that so many students said, or so many of my peers at the time said, they didn't watch the news, or they didn't care even. So as someone who had news on my TV all the time since I was very little, I can't remember life without it being a big part of my life, this was really shocking to me. So as I went into teaching, 10 years ago, I decided that bringing news into my classroom, no matter what I was teaching, if I was a librarian, if I was digital coach, if I was teaching design, was going to be really, really, really key to me. So often this would be an advisory, and I've had different advisory periods for either 15 minutes or 5 minutes. And so I would show like the CNN student news because it was a quick digest that you can show in the morning. I would often reel through the Guardian's photos of the week, or I'd look at Newspaper Map or Newseum's front pages, and really I was trying to show as much news as I possibly could to kind of spark an interest, to let my students know what was going on in the world, just in case they didn't watch the news outside of school. I actually quickly showed some of these just to my just the people in the workshop. So Newspaper Map is a really interesting resource. You can see it's a map all around the world, and you can click on the different newspapers, and you can find out the language, and then you can go and see that newspaper in that language. Oh, that one's not working. You can also search by language. So for example, if you want to look at Spanish language newspapers, you might say, okay, Spanish is all over the world. Let's look over here and see the different perspective we get in this country. So there's also a similar one, which is a radio map, which I really like because when you go over London, you see all the different language radios, and it always makes me happy, and I can go and listen to radio shows from all around the world. So I show that. And often if we're looking at an issue in my class that is based in a particular country, a particular place, we'll look at newspapers from that place. But really, when I first started off doing this, it was CNN Student News and the Guardian Photos of the Week. And with that, there are some really big problems. So firstly, I can't show them every news story ever. I was trying to show as many as possible, hoping that the students would be inspired by one or interested in one and go further. But I wasn't really creating that opportunity for them. And, my students are IB students. They're at school all day, then they go to football or basketball after school for 3 hours, and then they go play a game at another school, and then they are doing their homework all night. So I wasn't really making that opportunity or providing that time or space for them to go further. Also, with that intention, I am curating. So I'm choosing the news from the news sites that I read. So it's going to be skewed to my political beliefs. And also I'm giving a real Western, most of the news sites I look at are English or Americans. It's giving my perspective. And even though I felt like I was giving them all the news stories in the world, really I wasn't. So using Newspaper Map or using news sites from different countries really helped me to give less of my perspective. I'm still selecting what is shown in the mornings, but it's not as bad. And then also, often the complex issues that are really important and that really need to be solved are not something that's new. Yes, all these big scandals happen, and sometimes there's really powerful photographs that are showing a long-term issue right now, but there are many, many problems that are not reported because they're just something that exists all the time. So these were my big problems. I went to a few PZ events, and I went every year, grade 10, to the Washington, D.C., and it really started to get me to think about how I want to look at complex issues in real depth. So the photograph on the left is from one of Veronica's sessions, which was looking at this photograph of a woman working in Dandora. On the right, we looked at this painting called Manifest Destiny by Alexis Rockman, which we actually did a See Think Wonder and looked at just one quarter each. And at first, I thought it was like a fictional place or I don't know, and it's actually revealed that this is based on Brooklyn in the future, maybe, kind of when the world's been destroyed by humans. If you click on those links in the presentation, you'll see my write-up of those events. And in fact, I want to just show another resource that I showed to everyone in the session, which was Google Arts and Culture, a website I could spend hours on. It has so much art, so much artifacts, world wonders. If I look at the Alexis Rockman, for example, I think it only has 2 of his artworks, but here, I'm not actually going to the National Gallery of Art, but look, I can go in and I can put this on the whiteboard and I can zoom in and I can look at different parts of these pictures in great detail. So I don't have to go to a museum to explore this. And actually I took that activity and do it with my kids where I have different quarters laminated, they work at different tables and they bring it back together. But yeah, this resource is really, really, really cool. If you haven't explored it, put a few hours aside because it's one you want to go down the rabbit hole on. So after that, I also went to the National Museum of Art, and I think someone said to me that on average people spend only 7 seconds at a time looking at a work of art. And I was kind of shocked by that, but I kind of know that, I'm guilty of that. I walk around and I look at the stuff that immediately draws my attention. And from doing these activities, the National Gallery of Art, for example, I realised that actually the stuff that's the most interesting, or the stuff that I will actually remember the most or learn the most from, is not the stuff that visually appeals to me straight away. So it made me think of the importance of looking slowly and exploring just the one image. I also wondered if this is the same about photographs and newspapers, and I thought about the museum, which is a museum I really like. I remember different features in the museum, different parts of it I really like, and I kind of, I went there and it was a Pulitzer Prize winning photography exhibition, some of the winning photographs from the last however many years, and it was really cool. I remember really, really liking it, but then when I was thinking, I couldn't actually remember many of the photographs. I remembered a couple. So I think I probably did this really awful thing where I'd walk from one photograph and go, oh, that's so sad. And then to the next photograph, oh my God, that's so shocking. The next photograph, oh, that's so lovely. And so, yes, I was having that little emotional response, but really just from looking at it quickly, it was not leaving an impression on me, and I wasn't really learning. So that was another turning point. So I started doing these activities mostly in my advisory, and we would meet for 5 minutes in the morning and half an hour twice a week. And sometimes we'd have activities to do, but often we would just not have stuff planned for us. So I would just take a work of art or a news photograph, and I would show people this. So I'll just tell you about 2 of them. This bottom one is a gorilla called Janali, who is the selfie-loving gorilla. And I think all the photographs are like, look at this gorilla, it loves selfies. So my kids would look at that, and at first they're like, oh yeah, it's so funny. And then actually without any prompting, they went further and they're like, oh yeah, but she gets to go home, or she has the freedom, she has the choice. Whereas he's kind of stuck behind that glass. And they kind of went further and further, and they kind of flipped their opinion of it. And actually we found out that the Democratic Republic of Congo, they do a lot of mining for a certain mineral, which is used in nearly all electronic devices, and is one of the reasons that the population in this world of gorillas is declining. The next one I want to show you on right is actually, I guess, going back to what I said was a big problem about curating. Maybe this is more about bringing my own perspective, my own knowledge. To me, this is very, very British for 2 reasons. Tracksuit, right? Something that people wear in Britain a lot, but also it looks like sort of British porcelain. And so I'd had my students look at that and I'd say, yeah, I'm going to talk to you all about England today, and they really found that funny. And so we would look at this work, and I would also sometimes show them some of these. I don't want to try and pronounce French. Toile de jeu. Yeah. I'd show them these kind of sort of porcelain it's based on, but then I'd actually get them to look at it in detail. And what they would do when we zoomed in was that they would see all these modern scenes. They'd see the telephone booth cut in half, the piles of trash, maybe the smoke from a fire, people running away, people fighting, police, buses. And what I would actually tell them is that this is depicting the London riots, and I would speak to them about my experience as someone who used to live in Hackney, where a lot of the riots were, who then lived in Brixton, where some of the riots were, and actually grew up near Ealing, where people had their houses burned. So I really like looking at this with them, and that was a way to explore global issues. So even when I'm doing artworks, they're all global issue linked. Anyway, I then attended a session by Ron Richard, and the penny really dropped. I thought maybe I could look at one photograph for hours, or even for a whole unit, using this understanding map. And the understanding map itself, obviously there's no hierarchy or no order, but I did assign different sections, different activities. And really I thought about describe what's there and wondering as see, think, wonder. And I always thought that's probably the best thing for me to start the exploration of photographs with. And the ending would either be capture the heart and form conclusions, or build explanations. So the activities I had for here are write a paragraph, describe exactly what's happening, and describe how your learning has changed, and then capture the heart I had as headlines. But really for me, I always start with those and end with these ones, but the other ones are kind of interchangeable depending on the photograph or depending on the students. So I thought about assigning these different routines and activities that could support understanding, and just by looking at one photograph. So for me, I'm really a practical person, so I like having those tangible things. With this little routine I did, the next few pages are the exact same slides that I showed my students, and you can really plug in a different photograph. So I actually took over an ESOL class and did this for one of my teachers, and she loved it. She's like, oh, in my grade 12s, I'm doing a unit about new technologies. Can you find me a photograph I can use? And so I just found her a photograph of a robot-run hotel in Japan, which has 2 robots at the front desk. One is a dinosaur and one is a woman. And she did basically the same activity, basically almost the exact same presentation, changed a couple of words and plugged that photograph in. And so I realized, oh, okay, I can use this again. So with my workshop participants, I made them go through most of this. It was just a 2-hour workshop, and I probably spoke for 20 minutes at the beginning, so we didn't get to spend a lot of time going through every single element, but I kind of would go through each step and then tell them how I would do this in my class, how long I would use it for, how short, and kind of the different ways I could do it. So we'll do it quickly. I'll just tell you what I did. So the first thing is see and think, the see and think of See, Think, Wonder. Describe what's there, what do you see, what do you notice? And I had these printed on A3 paper so they could see in a lot of detail things that were happening in the background. And then I did the wonder. So I just said to them, see, list everything in the picture, think all your assumptions, and then wonder all your questions. And so this was really interesting. I got to keep some of them, and they said things like, oh, what have the people done wrong? Does the elephant like to be ridden? Is this in Asia? Is this in South America? What is this building? Is it a shop? Is it a house? I think it's an isolated area. What's happening? Why elephants? I wonder what the problem is. I had a really lovely group in my workshop. Everyone was engaged. Everyone was super focused. There's no activity that kind of the volume went down. They stopped, and I had to okay, we'll move on. Every single one I had to stop them short because of time. So it was nice to see them fully participating. So I learned a lot. And then I revealed to them a little bit more about the photograph after they'd done that. So policemen guide the elephants to demolish huts, which forest officials claimed were illegally built at the Am Chang Wildlife Sanctuary. Or, an elephant is used to demolish a house during an eviction drive inside Am Chang Wildlife Sanctuary on the outskirts of Guwahati, Assam, India. Monday, November 27th, 2017, Indian police on Monday took the unusual step of using elephants in an attempt to evict hundreds of people living illegally in the protected forest area in the country's remote northeast. Police used bulldozers and the elephants in a show of force, and the forest dwellers responded by hurling rocks. So when I reveal this to the kids, it's funny because I think because of the use of them living there illegally, straight away they're on the elephant side. They just say, oh, can't believe those people would live there. Those poor elephants. This is a wildlife sanctuary for a reason. And I kind of get mad about it. I've done this with two different groups. I actually done this with 3 groups, but in 2 different ways. One of the groups I give all of the articles to at this point. I give them a bunch of printouts from different news sites, from English news sites to Indian news sites. Print out of a website about the wildlife sanctuary. Print out a picture of the map of where this is, and then we moved on to the next activity. However, the second and third time I did it after the next step. So my next step was different viewpoints. This is trying to get my students emotional responses. So they say, I'm thinking of this topic from the viewpoint of either the policeman, the person being evicted, or the elephant, and then I think. And they write their piece about what they think, and then the question they have from this viewpoint. So with one of my classes, because this is the class that was really seeing everything as black and white, they're really adamant that the elephants were being wronged. Anyone who said they were going to do the elephant, I said, actually, you're going to do the viewpoint of the policeman. Anyone who did the policeman, I would change to the person being evicted and so forth. I'm going to read one of the things that the participant said, which I thought was really nice. They said, I'm thinking about this from the point of view of the policeman. I feel bad for the local people. Where is it gone? I'm reading the wrong one. Oh no, I'm thinking about this from the policeman. Oh, this morning I was briefed by my captain that we are going to ride elephants and demolish illegal squatters. I feel sad for the squatters because I think it's very sad to lose your home and shelter, but I cannot lose my job, so I will do it. Also, I'm kind of excited because I have not rode an elephant before. The squatters didn't react at first. They just took photographs of the elephants. And the questions I have are, why doesn't the government do more to provide basic housing? And how can this country improve? So I really loved the workshop participants' response here, just because it was so different to my students. What I noticed with my students was, again, they were still kind of one-sided. So I noticed that this one, the perspective she kind of was the policeman, but also understanding the point of view of the person who lives there. So the next thing I do, so some of my students I gave the articles to at this point, was I got them to debate whether they thought the policemen were right or wrong and use evidence from the articles to say why. I like doing this because often students, I find, will do research, do loads of research, they write facts and write what they read in different words, and they don't use it. So this is really forcing them to use the information. So they just have the emotive response from taking the viewpoint, and now with this one they're doing kind of the more factual or backing it up. And I can either get them to do this as like a paragraph or a newspaper, like a letter or something, or even a class debate, or I can just get them to highlight the evidence for their side of view. It depends on how long I want to spend. This is also a nice point to bring in the magic word of what makes you say that. So with the participants in the workshop, we didn't have much time to do this, but they pointed out some things like that the Am Chang Wildlife Sanctuary had just been announced as a wildlife sanctuary in 2004. So, imagine if you're interacting with a space your whole life, your grandparents interact with the space, and suddenly it's been given a new title. Physically, it's not changed or anything, but suddenly the laws and the way you're supposed to act in it are completely different. So that must be kind of strange. I think also this point brought a lot of questions because they're talking about, this is because of a high order from the court, but why doesn't the court then spend money on rehoming these people? And actually what I revealed to them also is that a lot of the people that live here have already been displaced from the monsoons. They're already living somewhere else and lost their housing because of the monsoon. They moved here for temporary shelter and now they are also being displaced again. So this next part is making connections, and some of the ones I had here were, what do you know about elephants and what do you know about Guwahati, India? And the reason they're quite superficial ones were because this was a standalone lesson I was doing when I first did it with a science class. I was just jumping in and doing this for several lessons. I wasn't part of their unit, it was just me taking over a few hours to do this. And so I knew that as grade 6s and a couple of grade 7s, they had obviously studied animals before. I knew in the primary school they'd done stuff about endangered animals, and I also knew we had a few students from India. So it was a really great way for them to bring in their prior knowledge. And I said, okay, now that because you knew this thing, is that why you decided to do the perspective of this person? And so we had that discussion. In this making connections, you can also link it to other global issues or other complex issues or things that you're studying. So for example, one of the participants said they're living in Paris and a lot of people are getting rehomed, or refugees are living in temporary shelter and getting kicked out of the shelter, so they could bring that comparison in. A comparison that I had was that my ESOL students, we did a whole thing where they had 30 different words at the very beginning of the unit all about living spaces. So it might be bedroom, telephone, technology, safety, rug, and they had to organise it. They first organised it however they wanted. Some people did it by room, some people did it by furniture, electronics, etc. And then we discussed why they organised it. The next part was that the students had to do it from most essential items to unnecessary items. And then it went down to the students choosing just 3 things. It was funny because when they didn't have that limit of 3 things, a lot of their essential items that were at the top of the list were things like mobile phones, internet. When they had to go down to 3 things, every single group said security, safety, and then the other things that were common were a bed or a sink. They said, a sink gives you access to water. You don't necessarily need to have a bath or a shower, but you need to have a sink. But security was a really big thing. So then when we came to do this session, I was able to link it back. So now that these people are having their houses demolished, they're losing those 3 things. So how does that feel? What are they going to do now that they don't have them? But you can make connections any way that you want. You could also use this in design. We do a little mini challenge where the students have to design housing just with, they have some foil from the first day, like warmth blanket, some lollipop sticks, etc. And they have different things. So housing for someone that's going to be on the move, maybe they're in a conflict zone, so they have to set up a temporary shelter, or maybe housing for someone who they live in a high earthquake place, or someone who's somewhere that's very flooded. They make this little housing, so we can link that to that too. But again, depends on the photograph, depends on your topics or your context. Okay, next one is uncovering the complexity. So what lies beneath the surface? So there's loads of different activities you could do with this. You could look at this one photograph and say, okay, what's going on here? Okay, it's about power and privilege. It's about the caste system in India. It's about endangered animals. It's about people being displaced. You could just link all the complex issues that come out of this. What I do with my students is just using question starts, because I find that they, even though we're exploring this in depth, they still go down the route of what links to their opinions or their personal views. And so doing this question starts, it leads them down a different tracks. They've already gone really deep down their own track, but actually coming up with these different questions really, really is interesting. And one of the questions one of the participants came up with was, how would this be different if this wasn't a wildlife sanctuary? And that's when I started telling them that it was only been since 2004 and how that would change it. So, or how would it be different if they had other housing to go to? So if the government actually didn't just destroy the house, they actually provided housing for these people. And then people shared their questions, and they discussed which ones are most important with my students. And I get them then to explore online. Actually, until this point, everything is unplugged. This is when they can kind of go down whatever route they want online. So the next two are, firstly, capture the heart and form conclusions. What's at the core center of this? This is the headlines routine. So if you were to write a headline for this topic or issue right now that captured the most important aspect that should be remembered, what would that headline be? So at this point, they have seen some articles. Some of them use this photographs. They have seen other headlines, but they think about what would they have their headlines as. And actually, if they look at the news in India, a lot of the reporting, if you type in the wildlife sanctuary name at elephants, it's just about elephants being mistreated. So that's the kind of news that they're getting from the media over there. They're not really seeing the human side of it. So that's also a nice discussion you can have about headlines for this. So the students and the workshop participants do this. And then lastly, we do build explanation. So what's really going on here? So really this part, they just summarize what's happening in one paragraph. So they're kind of writing the short news story. And the reason that I like to have this and the headline at the end is because then we can see how the learning has changed. We can look at that headline and that paragraph, and we can see, okay, how does this go to your initial thoughts and see, think, wonder? How different is this to your viewpoint when you took on the persona of the policeman, person being displaced, or the elephant? What about the debatable questions? Do you still have the same opinion? And it's really interesting. This is a really great way, I think, for students to discuss their learning. And they really surprised me when I had this question on the board. So even with my grade 6s, and this was a grade 6 class, I was just jumping into it. It wasn't my grade 6s when I first did this. It was really nice to see how this prompted them to talk about their thinking. And then I ended the workshop. I stole Ron Richards' take note routine that he showed the day before. I had people pick out something they thought was the most important, the most puzzling, questions they'd like to discuss, or something they found interesting. And they were able to do this about the elephant photograph or about the session itself. And then that was the end. So hopefully that kind of explained what happened in my session. Obviously, a lot of the rich learning happened was when people were working in small groups, doing these activities, having discussions on the table. That is really the most important part of the session. But maybe this gives you a bit of driftwood or something that you can see that you could use in your own school. So hopefully it's helpful. If you have any questions, you can always find me at Lenny Dutton, or you can find my blog at Excited Educator. Thank you.